Somewhere in your city tonight, a man is sitting in a perfectly normal apartment, scrolling through his phone, and the last real conversation he had, not small talk, not work logistics, not a text about plans, was so long ago he'd have to actually sit and think to remember when it was. He's not in a visible crisis. He pays his bills, he shows up, he answers good when someone asks, and he is quietly, systematically, completely alone. That's not a dramatic edge case. That's a Tuesday. Here on Psyche Shift, we dig into the psychological undercurrents that shape human experience in ways most people walk right past. Today's territory is uncomfortable, it's real, and honestly, it's overdue. Men die by suicide at nearly 4 times the rate of women across most Western nations. 4 times. Pause on that ratio for a moment, because it should fundamentally change how we think about who is struggling and who is getting attention for it. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you heard a major cultural conversation centered specifically on male psychological suffering? Not as a footnote, not as a counter-argument, as the actual subject. Right, it's rare. And that gap between the scale of the suffering and the volume of the cultural responses is exactly what this video is about. The data gets sharper the closer you look. Research from the Survey Center on American Life tracked something remarkable happening over the past 30 years. The percentage of men reporting 0 close friendships has gone from roughly 3% in 1990 to nearly 15% today. That's not a gradual drift. That's a collapse. An entire generation of men losing the connective tissue of their social lives, without most of us even registering it as a crisis worth naming. And here's what rarely gets examined. Loneliness isn't just about physical isolation. You can be surrounded by co-workers, have a full social calendar, live with a partner, and still be profoundly, achingly unknown by anyone around you. Loneliness lives in the gap between the connection you have and the connection that actually nourishes you. For a stunning number of men right now, that gap is widening by the year. So what do we call this? A personal failure, a character flaw, or a predictable outcome of systems we built and never questioned? This situation didn't arrive randomly. There's a specific architecture underneath it. 3 overlapping patterns that work together to trap men inside their own silence. Pull on any one of them without understanding the others, and nothing shifts. The first pattern lives at the very beginning of life. Developmental psychologists have spent considerable time documenting something that most of us experienced without ever having language for it. From early childhood, boys and girls receive systematically different responses to emotional expression. A young boy, call him Theo, 6 years old, trips at the playground and starts crying. The adults around him, well-meaning in every respect, default almost automatically to some version of "you're okay, shake it off, walk it off." A girl in the same scenario is far more likely to be held, to be asked where it hurts, to have her emotional experience validated and named. Neither response is villainous, but replicate that interaction across thousands of moments, across years, across every context a boy moves through, and what you've built, without intending to, is an adult man who doesn't just struggle to express emotions, he struggles to locate them. Something heavy and vague settles into his chest and he has genuinely no filing system for it. No vocabulary, no practiced pathway from feeling to language. So the feeling stays compressed, gets denser, eventually starts expressing itself in ways that are harder to trace. Irritability, withdrawal, physical symptoms, worse. This isn't a character weakness. This is the entirely logical result of a curriculum he was never given. Now here's the actionable reality. Emotional vocabulary is a skill, not an inborn trait. It's trainable at any age. Research consistently supports something as simple as a daily labeling practice, ending the day by identifying 3 specific emotional states using precise language, not vague catch-alls like fine or tired. The specificity is what builds the neural pathway. It sounds almost too modest. The results aren't. The second pattern is subtler, and in some ways more insidious. Call it the unspoken contract. Take two men who've been friends since their mid-20s, James and Ryan. They've known each other through jobs, relationships, moves across cities. They genuinely show up for each other in a practical emergency. But in 11 years of friendship, neither one has ever said something like, "I've been struggling lately," without immediately adding a deflecting punchline. Neither one has asked the other, "How are you actually doing?" and waited for a real answer. Both of them are, in some quiet way, lonely within the friendship, and both of them have been waiting, without realizing they're waiting, for the other person to go first. The psychological mechanism here is mutual risk management. Emotional openness carries social exposure. If you go first and the other person responds with discomfort, with a joke, with a visible need to change the subject, you've just made yourself vulnerable and gotten nothing back. That's a social cost. So both people protect themselves by waiting. And the friendship, real as it is, never gets past the surface, year after year. This is precisely why just open up more is such unhelpful advice in isolation. It ignores the social math. Vulnerability needs a perceived landing zone before most people will try it. And for men who've spent decades operating inside this unspoken contract, building that landing zone is the actual work, not just deciding to be more honest. The third pattern is structural, and it's probably the most overlooked. It's about what suffering has to look like before society responds to it. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the identifiable victim effect. Simplified, human empathy responds most powerfully to suffering that is clearly visible, clearly expressed, clearly named. We are wired to respond to signals. When signals are absent or suppressed, our nervous systems read that as no distress here, even when the reality is the complete opposite. Here's where this intersects with everything we just covered. Women, statistically, are more likely to externalize emotional distress, to articulate it, to seek support for it, to build community structures around it. Men, shaped by the conditioning we just walked through, are trained to internalize it, to manage the presentation, to keep the signal muted. The structural result is almost painfully logical once you see it. Expressed suffering draws cultural attention, empathy and resources. Suppressed suffering reads as no suffering. No perceived need means no response. Men stay isolated. The quiet gets louder. The cycle continues. Nobody designed this outcome maliciously. It emerged from the collision of how human empathy works and how men were taught to carry pain. But the outcome is the same regardless of intent. An entire population of people in genuine distress that the world has collectively learned to look straight through. And when this observation surfaces in public conversation, something frustrating tends to happen. People hear it as a competition, as if acknowledging male isolation somehow subtracts from other conversations about suffering. That framing is both psychologically inaccurate and practically destructive. Recognizing suffering in one group has never required dismissing it in another. Pain is not a finite resource that gets divided up. Multiple things can be true at the same time, and one of those things is that right now a significant portion of the male population is disappearing into a silence that nobody is treating as an emergency. Social scientists who study relationship formation keep landing on the same three conditions: proximity, frequency, and low-stakes repeated interaction. You need to be near the same people regularly, without it being a production, over a sustained period of time. That's how trust builds. That's how people move past surfaces. School creates this effortlessly. Early work environments often do too. But somewhere in a man's mid-30s, the architecture collapses. The team changes. People move. Everyone's schedule fills up. And every social interaction suddenly requires being scheduled, which raises the stakes immediately and removes the organic, unplanned quality that actually produces real closeness. Consider what happens to someone like David, 38, when his company restructures and his work team scatters. The friendships he had were almost entirely context-dependent, built on proximity that no longer exists. He still genuinely likes those people. But without the shared context, the friendships have no engine. They fade slowly, the way most things do when nobody's actively maintaining them. Women, on average, navigate this transition more effectively, not because of any fundamental emotional difference, but because female social culture tends to build explicit maintenance structures. Regular calls, standing plans, intentional check-ins that don't require a specific reason. Male social culture tends to rely almost entirely on shared context as the glue. When context disappears, so does the connection. This framing matters because it redefines the problem. It's not about men being emotionally deficient or failing at friendship. It's about architecture. The conditions that produce connection have been quietly removed, and nobody handed anyone a blueprint for rebuilding them. What that reconstruction actually looks like in practice. Recurring low-stakes structures work better than occasional significant ones. A standing bi-weekly call that you both know is happening removes the activation energy of initiation. A casual group chat with a low bar for participation keeps threads alive. Regularity matters more than depth in the early stages. You're rebuilding proximity by other means. Men seek mental health support at dramatically lower rates. This is stated so often it's become almost background noise. But the explanation that usually follows, stigma, is only partly accurate, and stopping there misses the more important layer. For a significant portion of men, seeking help doesn't just feel embarrassing, it feels like a category violation, like asking someone else to fix something you were implicitly contracted to handle on your own. The identity built around self-reliance, built gradually, built early, reinforced constantly, experiences outside support as evidence of fundamental inadequacy. Not social awkwardness, identity-level failure. 4. Words capture it. I should handle this. Not 4 words about weakness. 4 words about an identity that was constructed over 30 years and doesn't easily accommodate alternatives. And identity conflicts are structurally different from informational barriers. You can't solve an identity conflict by providing more information. You have to engage the identity itself. What actually works, according to emerging clinical research, is reframing rather than dismantling. Therapy presented as a space to process your emotions has low uptake among men who've internalized self-reliance as a core value. The same therapeutic work framed as a practical system for operating more effectively under pressure. Same room, same therapist, different language, shows meaningfully better engagement. The framing speaks to the existing identity rather than challenging it. Efficiency, optimization, removing load from a system that's carrying too much, that's not manipulation, it's accuracy. Unprocessed psychological weight genuinely does degrade performance, decision quality, and long-term health. Addressing it is the competent, high-functioning move, and sometimes men need to hear it stated exactly that way before they'll allow themselves through the door. Zoom out from individual psychology for a moment, because the loneliness crisis doesn't exist in a cultural vacuum. It exists inside a value system that has historically assessed men primarily through their outputs, their productivity, their utility, their status and what it provides to others. When a man is successful, when he's useful, when he's delivering, he gets attention, approval, connection. When he's struggling, when his performance dips, when he's just a person in pain without anything particular to offer, the social reward structure collapses, and he becomes functionally invisible, sometimes even to the people closest to him. This creates a particularly vicious trap. The men most in need of genuine connection are often the ones whose circumstances make them least able to perform the version of themselves that generates connection. The recently divorced father, the man who just lost his job, the one who's been quietly anxious for 3 years, and has been so focused on appearing fine that he stopped being able to access what he actually feels. Real belonging, the kind that actually addresses loneliness, requires that someone's presence is valued independent of their function. Not what they contribute, not what they solve, just that they're there. and that matters. For a striking number of men, that experience is genuinely foreign, not because the people around them don't care, often they do, but because the caring has almost always been expressed through and about the functional version of them. The wife who loves her husband deeply, but has never once sat in his uncertainty with him. The adult son whose father admires him but has never asked what he actually worries about at 2 a.m. The co-worker who would absolutely help in a practical crisis, but would have no idea what to do in an emotional one. None of these people are failing on purpose. They're operating inside the same system we've been describing, but the outcome is the same. Men whose inner world has never really been witnessed, and that absence of being known, genuinely known by someone, is at the core of what makes loneliness so corrosive over time. All of this matters precisely because it points toward real changes rather than vague aspirations. So let's get specific. For men navigating this personally, 3 shifts consistently emerge from both research and clinical practice as genuinely moving the needle. Lower the initiation threshold first. The internal rule that says reaching out requires a concrete reason is quietly doing damage. That rule preserves dignity at the cost of connection. Reaching out for no particular reason, checking in without an agenda, sending a message that says nothing more than been thinking about you lately. This is not neediness, this is maintenance. These small acts of initiation are what keep the connective tissue alive between the moments when you actually need each other. Build recurring structure second. Not one meaningful annual conversation, but regular low-stakes repetition. A standing dinner, a weekly voice note. A recurring reason to show up that doesn't require either person to feel like it's a big deal. The research on friendship maintenance is consistent here. Frequency predicts closeness more reliably than intensity. You don't build depth by scheduling it. You build depth by showing up regularly until depth happens naturally. Get comfortable with asymmetry third. Sometimes you'll be more open than the other person is ready to match. Sometimes the conversation won't go the direction you hoped. That's not rejection. That's the inevitable texture of breaking a long-standing unspoken contract. One person always has to go first and keep going first until the other person gradually understands that it's safe. It's uncomfortable. It works. For people trying to support a man in their life who seems to be carrying something, ask the second question. When someone says they're fine, the socially expected move is to accept that and continue. What cuts through the script is following up. You seem like you've got something on your mind, or, genuinely, how have things been lately? Not as interrogation, but as a signal that you actually want to know. For a man who has spent years sending muted signals and having them go unread, that second question can shift something real. And at the broader cultural level, we need to expand what we're willing to recognize as a crisis. A man losing friendships year by year, going weeks without a real conversation, performing stability so consistently that he's lost track of what's beneath it. That man is in distress. The absence of visible collapse is not evidence of absence of need. It's evidence of an excellent performance. Somewhere in your city tonight, probably within a few blocks of where you're sitting, someone like Theo from the playground is now in his late 30s. He's functioning. He answers fine when people ask. He has people who technically know him and would help if there was a concrete emergency, and he has been quietly disappearing from the inside for longer than he'd want to admit. The people around him mostly don't know, not because they're callous, because he's good at disappearing quietly. And because we built, without fully meaning to, a world that makes quiet disappearance extraordinarily easy. What changes this isn't a single conversation or a single video or a single policy shift. It's an accumulation of second questions asked, of recurring structures built, of someone deciding that the men in their lives deserve to be known, not just admired, of men deciding that carrying everything alone is not strength. It's just a very old habit that stopped serving anyone a long time ago. The visibility starts with someone deciding to look. If this landed somewhere real for you, Share it with one person who needs to hear it. Not as a lecture, just as a door left open.